The transport ship Stellar Harmony docked at Station Beta 7 with the mechanical precision that marked all Galactic Federation vessels. Among the hundreds of passengers disembarking, one figure moved with a different quality of stillness. Maya-chan walked through the crowded terminal with the measured pace of someone who had learned that sudden movements could mean death. At 19, Maya carried herself with the quiet confidence of a survivor. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her clothes were practical, sturdy boots, cargo pants, and a jacket that had seen better days. To most observers, she looked like any other human student heading to the prestigious Galactic Academy. They couldn't see the scars hidden beneath her sleeves, or the way her eyes automatically catalogued exit routes and potential weapons in every room she entered. Maya had grown up on Kepler 442b, a planet the Galactic Federation had designated as Class X hazardous, but which locals simply called Hell's Garden. The planet was beautiful in the way that deadly things often were, with crystalline forests that could slice through steel, predators that hunted by reading electromagnetic fields, and weather patterns that could shift from calm to catastrophic in minutes. Most Federation citizens lived their entire lives without setting foot on a planet more dangerous than a controlled garden world. Maya had spent 18 years learning to read the subtle signs that meant the difference between seeing another sunrise and becoming fertilizer for the singing trees. The Academy's orientation materials had suggested that students arrive 3 days early to acclimate to the diverse social environment. Maya suspected this was code for learn to interact with species you've only seen in textbooks, but she appreciated the extra time. Crowds made her nervous not because she feared people, but because crowds moved unpredictably. Her assigned dormitory was in the Terran sector, a collection of buildings designed to accommodate human physiology and psychology. The architecture was all curves and soft edges, painted in calming earth tones that probably tested well with focus groups. After 18 years of jagged rock formations and bioluminescent warning displays, it felt unnaturally tame. Maya's roommate had already moved in. Zara Okafor was from New Lagos, one of the Federation's most peaceful colony worlds. Her side of the room was decorated with holographic plants, family photos, and what appeared to be an impressive collection of academic awards. She greeted Maya with the kind of enthusiasm that suggested she'd never met someone who might need to kill something before breakfast. "You must be Maya. I'm so excited to have a roommate from one of the frontier worlds. I've read that Kepler 442b has some of the most unique ecosystems in known space. The biodiversity reports are fascinating, though I imagine the practical reality is quite different from academic papers." Zara spoke quickly, her words tumbling over each other with nervous energy. Maya recognized the pattern, intellectual curiosity mixed with the kind of sheltered worldview that came from growing up somewhere safe. She'd encountered it before during her rare trips to Federation trading posts. "The papers usually focus on the pretty parts," Maya said, setting her single duffel bag on the empty bed. "They don't mention that most of the biodiversity is actively trying to eat you." "Oh." Zara's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. "Was it difficult? Growing up there?" Maya considered how to answer. Most Federation citizens thought difficult meant dealing with unreliable network connections or finding good coffee. How could she explain that her childhood games had involved learning to distinguish between the calls of different predators, or that her mother had taught her to set bone traps before she'd learned to read? "Different," Maya said finally. "But everyone grows up somewhere." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway. Loud voices carried through the thin walls, followed by what sounded like furniture being moved. Maya automatically stepped toward the door, her body tensing in preparation for whatever threat might emerge. Zara, meanwhile, looked merely curious. "Sounds like someone's having trouble with their luggage," Zara said. "Should we offer to help?" Before Maya could respond, their door chimed. Maya opened it to find a tall, broad-shouldered figure in the corridor. The being stood nearly 7 feet tall, with the distinctive blue-gray skin and prominent bone ridges that marked him as Xerian. His clothes were expensive, the kind of synthetic fabrics that cost more than most frontier families saw in a year, and his bearing suggested someone accustomed to having his way. "Human females," he said, his voice carrying the metallic undertones common to Xerian vocal cords. "I am Faxmore of the 3rd Hereditary Trading House. I require you to relocate to different accommodations." This sector has been designated for my use. Zara stepped forward with a confused smile. I think there might be some misunderstanding. This is the Terran dormitory, and we're both enrolled students. Our housing assignments are invalid, Faxmore interrupted. Zirian physiology requires specific atmospheric controls and spatial arrangements. Human requirements are adaptable. You will gather your possessions and relocate within the hour. Maya studied the alien's posture and expression. She'd encountered Zirians before during trading expeditions to frontier stations. They were apex predators on their homeworld, with strength and reflexes that made them formidable in physical confrontations. This one carried himself with the additional arrogance that came from wealth and status. More importantly, he was lying. The dormitory's environmental systems were designed to accommodate multiple species, and Zirians had no special spatial requirements beyond the standard for large humanoids. This wasn't about physiology, it was about dominance. Our housing assignments are valid, Maya said quietly. You might want to check with administration if there's been an error with yours. Faxmore's bone ridges shifted slightly, the Zirian equivalent of raising an eyebrow. You question my authority, human? I'm pointing out facts, Maya replied. Her voice remained level, but Zara noticed that her roommate had shifted her weight slightly, settling into a more balanced stance. Facts? Faxmore's laugh was a harsh sound. The fact is that humans are a junior species in the Federation. You exist at the sufferance of your betters. When one of your betters requires accommodation, you comply. We're all students here, Zara interjected, though uncertainty had crept into her voice. Surely there's room for everyone. Silence, Faxmore snapped. Adults are speaking. The dismissal was casual and absolute, the kind that revealed how the speaker truly viewed those around him. Maya felt something cold settle in her chest, not fear, but recognition. She'd encountered this dynamic before, though usually from human bullies who thought frontier children were easy targets. You're new here, Maya said to Faxmore, so I'll explain once. This is our room. Our assignments are valid. If you have a problem with that, take it up with administration. Faxmore stepped closer, using his height advantage to loom over the human girls. Perhaps you misunderstand your position, little human. On civilized worlds, disputes are resolved through proper channels. But, I am Zirian. We handle challenges more directly. The threat was clear enough. Zirians were known throughout the Federation for their physical prowess and their cultural emphasis on dominance hierarchies. Most species found it easier to accommodate their demands rather than risk confrontation. Maya tilted her head slightly, studying the alien with the same attention she might give to an unfamiliar predator. Are you threatening us? I am explaining reality, Faxmore replied. Human females from garden worlds lack the strength or will to resist Zirian authority. You will relocate, or I will relocate you. Behind Maya, Zara made a small sound of distress. The threat of violence in what should have been a safe academic environment clearly shocked her. Maya, meanwhile, felt a familiar calm settling over her, the same stillness that had kept her alive during hunting seasons and storm cycles. Interesting perspective, she said. Her voice was softer now, almost conversational. What makes you think I'm from a garden world? The question seemed to confuse Faxmore. You are human. Humans occupy safe worlds under Federation protection. You have no experience with real danger. Maya nodded thoughtfully. Right. And, because I'm human and female, you assume I'll be easy to intimidate. I do not assume, Faxmore said, his chest swelling with pride. I know. Zirian strength is legendary. Human fragility is well documented. Documented by whom? The question hung in the air. Faxmore's confidence faltered slightly as he realized he was being led somewhere he hadn't intended to go. By scientific observation, he said. Comparative biological studies. Studies of humans from which worlds? All human worlds, Faxmore replied, though uncertainty had crept into his voice. Maya smiled, and something in that expression made Zara step backward. It wasn't a pleasant smile, it was the kind that appeared on the faces of predators when prey wandered too close. That's where you made your first mistake, Maya said. Those studies focus on humans from Federation core worlds. Garden worlds. Safe places where the biggest danger is stubbing your toe on furniture. She took a step forward, and, despite his size advantage, Thaxmore found himself stepping back. I'm from Kepler 442b, Maya continued. It's a Class X death world where the flowers can kill you and the trees hunt in packs. I've been fighting for my life since I could walk. So when you threaten me. Another step forward. Thaxmore was now backed against the corridor wall. You're not threatening a garden world human. You're challenging something that evolved to survive in hell. The corridor had gone quiet. Other students had emerged from their rooms to watch the confrontation, drawn by the raised voices and the promise of drama. Most had never seen a Zirian back down by anyone, let alone a human girl who barely reached his chest. Thaxmore's bone ridges were now fully extended, a sign of agitation in his species. You cannot threaten me. I am protected by Federation law and Zirian tradition. I'm not threatening you, Maya said calmly. I'm educating you. There's a difference between strength and experience. Between size and survival instinct. You've spent your life being the biggest thing in the room. I've spent mine learning to kill things bigger than me. The truth of her words was evident in every line of her body. Maya stood like someone who had never lost a fight because losing meant death. Her stillness wasn't the calm of meditation, it was the absolute focus of a predator deciding whether something was worth killing. This is not how civilized beings conduct themselves, Thaxmore said, but his voice lacked conviction. You're right, Maya agreed. Civilized beings don't try to intimidate their classmates into giving up their legally assigned housing. They don't use physical threats to get their way. They certainly don't assume that someone's gender or species makes them easy prey. She paused, letting her words sink in. But, if you want to settle this the uncivilized way, I'm happy to accommodate you. The offer hung in the air like a challenge. Around them, the gathered students watched with fascination and growing alarm. This wasn't how conflicts were supposed to resolve at the academy. Physical confrontations between students were theoretically possible but practically unheard of. Thaxmore looked around at the watching faces, realizing that his attempted intimidation had become a public humiliation. His entire social standing was built on the assumption of Zirian supremacy, and that assumption was crumbling under the steady gaze of a human girl who showed no fear. There has been a misunderstanding, he said finally. I was merely clarifying housing protocols. Of course, Maya said. And, now that the protocols are clear, I'm sure you can find your way to your properly assigned room. Thaxmore straightened his expensive clothes and attempted to salvage some dignity. This matter is not concluded, he said, but the words lacked heat. Yes, it is, Maya replied simply. The Zirian stared at her for a long moment, searching for some crack in her composure, some sign of the fear or uncertainty he expected from humans. He found nothing but the patient attention of someone who had faced down creatures with claws and fangs and lived to tell about it. Without another word, Thaxmore turned and strode down the corridor, his heavy footsteps echoing off the walls. The gathered students began to disperse, their excited whispers filling the space he left behind. Maya waited until the corridor was empty before stepping back into her room. Zara followed, closing the door behind them with hands that still trembled slightly. What just happened? Zara asked. I mean, I understand what happened, but how did you do that? He's enormous, and Zirions are supposed to be incredibly strong. Maya sat on her bed and began unpacking her single bag. Strength doesn't matter if you don't know how to use it. He's probably never been in a real fight in his life. Just relied on his size and species reputation to get his way. But you were so calm. Like you weren't afraid at all. I wasn't, Maya said simply. Fear is useful when it warns you about real danger. He wasn't dangerous, just loud. Zara stared at her roommate with new eyes. The quiet girl who had seemed so ordinary an hour ago had just faced down one of the Federation's most physically imposing species without breaking a sweat. "What's it really like?" Zara asked quietly. "Growing up on a death world?" Maya paused in her unpacking, holding a small device that looked like it had been crafted from bone and metal. "It's like growing up anywhere else, except the margin for error is smaller. You learn to pay attention. To read situations quickly. To understand that sometimes the best way to avoid a fight is to make it clear you're not afraid of one." "Do you think he'll try again?" Maya considered the question. "Maybe. Probably not directly. His type usually tries to save face through proxies or politics. We'll see." She resumed unpacking, her movements economical and precise. Zara watched, noting the subtle differences in her roommate's gear. Everything was practical, durable, designed for function over form. Even her clothes were subtly reinforced, she realized, not armor, exactly, but not the purely decorative fabrics most students wore. "Maya?" Zara said after a while. "Thank you. For standing up to him, I mean. I don't think I could have done that." "You might surprise yourself," Maya replied. "But, hopefully you'll never have to find out." Outside their window, the academy's grounds stretched toward the horizon, carefully manicured lawns and precisely planted gardens that had never known the touch of natural predators. It was beautiful in its way, but Maya found herself missing the honest danger of home. She had come to the academy to learn, to bridge the gap between her world and the wider Federation. But it seemed the academy had lessons to teach her that weren't in any curriculum. Some of her classmates, she realized, had never learned the difference between civilization and weakness. That was a mistake she could help them correct, if necessary. The thought didn't particularly bother her. After all, education was supposed to be a two-way process. Word traveled fast through the academy's social networks. By the next morning, everyone seemed to know about the human girl who had stared down Thaxmore of the Third Hereditary Trading House without flinching. The story grew in the telling. Some versions had Maya threatening the Zirian with mysterious Deathworld weapons, others claimed she had actually challenged him to formal combat. Maya herself remained largely unaware of her sudden notoriety. She attended her morning classes with the same quiet focus she brought to everything else, taking notes on galactic history and xenobiology with the same attention to detail that had once helped her track storm patterns across Kepler 442b's unpredictable landscape. Her first class was Comparative Civilizations, taught by Professor Velkar, a Menthuri whose species was known for their diplomatic skills and cultural sensitivity. The professor's four eyes could track multiple students simultaneously, and her feathered crest shifted colors to indicate her emotional state, currently a calm blue-green that suggested professional interest. "Today we'll be examining the concept of cultural relativism," Professor Velkar announced, her synthesized voice carrying the musical tones that made Menthuri so effective as mediators. "How do we reconcile different species' approaches to conflict resolution, social hierarchy, and individual rights within a unified galactic framework?" Maya found herself wondering if the professor had chosen today's topic in response to yesterday's corridor incident. Academic institutions were notorious for their indirect approaches to addressing problems. "Miss Chen," the professor said, her secondary eyes focusing on Maya while her primary pair continued scanning the room. "As someone from a frontier world, you might have a unique perspective on this issue. How do different survival pressures shape cultural values?" The question was carefully phrased, not asking about the confrontation directly, but opening a door for discussion. Maya appreciated the professor's diplomatic approach, even if she suspected ulterior motives. "Survival environments shape priorities," Maya said simply. "When resources are scarce or threats are constant, cultures tend to value efficiency over comfort, results over process. Social hierarchies often form around competence rather than tradition." "Interesting," Professor Velkar said, her crest shifting to a deeper blue that indicated thoughtful consideration. "And how might such cultures interact with those that have developed in safer environments?" Maya glanced around the classroom, noting the mix of species and backgrounds. Most of her classmates came from core worlds where the biggest predators were kept in carefully controlled preserves and the weather was regulated by orbital platforms.
Misunderstandings, Maya said after a moment. What one culture sees as necessary caution, another might view as paranoia. What frontier cultures consider basic preparedness, core world cultures might interpret as aggression. Can you elaborate on that distinction? Maya considered how to explain without sounding like she was criticizing her classmates' backgrounds. On Kepler 442b, we teach children to evaluate every new situation for potential threats. It's not paranoia when the environment actually is trying to kill you, it's just practical. But, in safer environments, that same behavior pattern can be perceived as hostile or antisocial. A student from the middle row raised a tentacle at Aquilian whose home system was known for its peaceful trading colonies. But, surely there's a point where such vigilance becomes unnecessary? When you're in a safe environment, wouldn't it be healthier to relax those survival reflexes? The question was genuine, without malice, but it revealed a fundamental misunderstanding about how adaptation worked. Maya had encountered this before, the assumption that survival skills were like clothes you could simply remove when they were no longer needed. Reflexes aren't conscious decisions, Maya said patiently. They're trained responses that become part of your nervous system. A hunter doesn't stop scanning for threats just because they enter a peaceful village, the scanning becomes automatic, background processing. But, that must be exhausting, said a human student from New Geneva, one of the Federation's most prosperous garden worlds. Constantly being on guard, always looking for danger that isn't there. Maya shook her head. It's only exhausting if you fight it. If you accept it as part of how you function, it becomes as natural as breathing. The energy cost is minimal when it's properly integrated. Professor Velkar's crest was now cycling through rapid color shifts, the mentary equivalent of excitement. This touches on an important point about cultural integration within the Federation. How do we create inclusive environments that respect different adaptive strategies? Education, said the Aquilian student. Understanding breeds tolerance. Communication, added the New Geneva human. Open dialogue about different perspectives. Maya listened to her classmates' suggestions with mild interest. Their answers were textbook responses, the kind that looked good in academic papers but ignored the messier realities of actual interaction. They assumed that misunderstanding was the root of all conflict, that sufficient explanation could resolve any difference. Respect, Maya said when the suggestions died down. Understanding is useful, but it's not always possible. You can't really understand someone else's survival pressures without living them. But, you can respect that those pressures shape them in ways that make sense within their context. And, if respect isn't reciprocated? Professor Velkar asked, her crest now a sharp yellow that indicated focused attention. The question hung in the air, and Maya realized that the entire class was watching her response. Word of yesterday's incident had definitely reached the faculty. Then, you enforce boundaries, Maya said simply. Respect is a two-way process. You can't demand it from others if you're not willing to give it. And, if someone refuses to give it, they forfeit their right to receive it. Some might argue that such an approach escalates conflicts rather than resolving them, the professor said carefully. Maya met her gaze directly. Some conflicts can't be resolved through discussion. When someone is fundamentally committed to dominance over cooperation, talking won't change their mind. Sometimes the only language they understand is strength. The classroom fell silent. Maya's words carried implications that made her garden world classmates uncomfortable. They had grown up in environments where conflicts were resolved through institutional mediation, where the threat of violence was so abstract as to be theoretical. Professor Velkar's crest cycled through several colors before settling on a neutral purple. That's a perspective worth considering, she said finally. Class dismissed. For next session, please read Chapter 7 on conflict resolution across species lines. As students filed out, Maya noticed several of her classmates giving her curious looks. Some seemed impressed, others concerned. A few appeared frankly frightened by her casual discussion of enforcing boundaries through strength. Maya gathered her materials and headed for her next class, Advanced Xenobiology. The lecture hall was larger, with stadium seating that could accommodate several hundred students from multiple species.
She chose a seat near the back, partly out of habit, partly because it offered clear sightlines to all entrances. The professor was Dr. Koresh-9, a hive-mind consciousness that manifested through a cluster of insectoid drones. The collective was renowned throughout the Federation for its research into extremophile organisms, life forms that thrived in environments that would kill most sentient species. Today we examine adaptation to hostile environments, Dr. Koresh-9 announced, their synthesized voice emerging from multiple sources simultaneously. Specifically, we'll study the remarkable evolutionary pressures that shaped life on the most dangerous worlds in Federation space. A holographic display materialized above the lecture hall, showing a three-dimensional map of the galaxy with various systems highlighted in different colors. Maya immediately spotted Kepler 442b among the red markers indicating Class X hazard worlds. These death worlds represent less than 0.01% of habitable planets, the professor continued, yet they have produced some of the most remarkable adaptations in known biology. Who can tell me what makes these environments so challenging? Several hands shot up. Dr. Koresh-9's primary drone gestured toward a crystalline student whose silicon-based physiology made them naturally resilient to many environmental hazards. Extreme temperature variations, toxic atmospheres, aggressive predator species, the student rattled off. Geological instability, radiation exposure, resource scarcity. Correct, but incomplete, Dr. Koresh-9 said. Those are individual challenge categories. What makes death worlds truly dangerous is the combination and interaction of multiple threat vectors. A world might have manageable predators and tolerable weather, but when those predators hunt using electromagnetic fields during the same storm cycles that disrupt electronic equipment. The professor's point was illustrated by a detailed simulation of Kepler 442b during a typical storm season. Maya watched with professional interest as the display showed lightning patterns that would fry most standard technology while predators with bioelectric senses moved through the chaos with deadly efficiency. Note how survival on such worlds requires not just adaptation to individual threats, but the development of integrated response systems, Dr. Koresh-9 continued. Organisms must simultaneously monitor multiple variables while maintaining the flexibility to respond to rapid environmental changes. A student from one of the inner core worlds raised her hand. How do sentient species survive in such conditions? Surely technology can compensate for biological limitations? Maya suppressed a smile. The question revealed the typical garden world assumption that technology was always the answer to environmental challenges. An excellent question, Dr. Koresh-9 said. Who would like to address the role of technology in death world survival? Maya found herself raising her hand before she consciously decided to speak. The professor's cluster of drones all turned toward her with coordinated precision. Technology helps, Maya said, but it can also become a liability. Electronic systems fail during electromagnetic storms. Mechanical devices jam with dust or moisture. Power cells drain faster in extreme temperatures. Death world survival requires backup systems for your backup systems, plus the skills to function without any technology at all. Elaborate on that final point, Dr. Koresh-9 requested. When I was 12, Maya said, speaking to the room but focusing on the core world student who had asked the question, I got caught in a Class 5 geomagnetic storm while hunting crystal moths. All my equipment failed, navigation, communication, even my basic shelter kit. I spent 3 days finding my way home using stellar navigation and improvised tools. The lecture hall was completely silent now. Maya realized that her casual mention of a solo hunting trip at age 12 had shocked many of her classmates. On garden worlds, 12-year-olds were barely allowed to walk to school without supervision. The point, Maya continued, is that technology should enhance your natural abilities, not replace them. If you can't survive without your tools, you don't really know how to survive at all. Dr. Koresh-9's drones clicked in what Maya recognized as the hive mind equivalent of approval. Precisely correct. Technology is most effective when it amplifies existing capabilities rather than substituting for them. Miss Chen, I believe you're from Kepler 442b? Yes, Professor. Would you be willing to share some practical examples of integrated survival strategies? Your real-world experience would be invaluable for students who've only encountered these concepts in simulation.
Maya hesitated.
She'd come to the academy partly to escape the constant need to prove her competence to outsiders who couldn't understand her background. But the professor's request was genuine, and her classmates seemed genuinely interested rather than simply curious about the savage frontier girl.
"All right," she said.
"But I should mention that most of what I'll describe is completely automatic for anyone who grew up on a Deathworld. We don't think of it as special or exotic, it's just how you live."
For the next 30 minutes, Maya found herself describing the practical realities of survival on Kepler 442b.
She explained how children learned to read atmospheric pressure changes that preceded predator migrations. How families coordinated resource gathering with stellar positioning to avoid the worst seasonal hazards. How communities developed communication systems that functioned during electromagnetic interference.
Her classmates listened with fascination and growing respect. Maya's descriptions weren't boastful or dramatic, they were matter-of-fact accounts of daily life in an environment that would kill most Federation citizens within hours.
The casual competence with which she discussed tracking apex predators and navigating by stellar position made it clear that her previous day's confrontation with Thaxmore hadn't been an aberration. "Remarkable," Dr. Koresh-9 said when Maya finished.
"You've provided an excellent real-world example of adaptive integration. Class, note how Ms. Chen's descriptions emphasize redundancy, flexibility, and the importance of understanding systems rather than just using tools." As the lecture ended and students began filing out, Maya noticed a cluster of her classmates approaching her seat.
Most seemed curious and friendly, but she spotted a few whose expressions were harder to read.
"That was incredible," said a Deltan student whose people were known for their mathematical abilities. "I had no idea Deathworld survival was so complex.
The way you described tracking storm patterns while monitoring for predators, it's like solving multiple equation sets simultaneously."
"It is, basically," Maya agreed. "Except the variables are constantly changing and a wrong answer can kill you." "How do you handle the stress?" asked the human from New Geneva. "I mean, the constant awareness of danger must be overwhelming." Maya considered the question. "What stress?" "It's only stressful if you think you have a choice.
When danger is just part of the environment, you adapt to it the same way you adapt to gravity or air pressure." "But don't you ever wish you'd grown up somewhere safer?" pressed another student.
"Do you ever wish you'd grown up somewhere more challenging?" Maya countered gently. "Every environment shapes the people who live in it. I am who I am because of where I came from.
Wishing I were different is like wishing I were someone else entirely." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the lecture hall's main entrance. A group of students had clustered around someone, and their body language suggested tension rather than casual socializing.
Maya's trained reflexes kicked in automatically, cataloging the scene for potential threats.
At the center of the cluster stood Thaxmore, his expensive clothes unchanged but his bearing somehow diminished from the previous day. He was speaking in the low, intense tones that Maya recognized as someone trying to rebuild their reputation after a public humiliation. Mere posturing, he was saying to the gathered students.
"Humans are well known for their theatrical behavior when they feel threatened."
No doubt she has been practicing her little speech for just such an occasion.
Maya felt her classmates' attention shift between her and the Zirian. The dynamics were obvious enough. Thaxmore was trying to reframe yesterday's encounter as a performance rather than a genuine display of confidence.
It was a smart strategy, actually, playing into common assumptions about human behavior while providing him with a face-saving narrative. "What are you going to do?" whispered the Deltan student.
Maya gathered her materials and stood up.
"Nothing," she said simply.
"Nothing?"
"He's embarrassed, so he's trying to convince himself and others that what happened yesterday wasn't real."
"Let him."
Maya shouldered her bag and started toward one of the hall's side exits.
"His opinion of me doesn't change what I am."
But, as Maya reached the exit, Thaxmore's voice rose loud enough to carry across the hall.
"Perhaps the human would like to demonstrate her alleged capabilities under more controlled circumstances?" Maya paused at the doorway.
Around the hall, conversations died as students realized that Thaxmore was issuing some kind of challenge. The smart thing would be to keep walking, to let the Zirian posture and bluster while she went about her business.
Engaging would only escalate the situation. But Maya had learned long ago that some challenges, once issued publicly, couldn't be ignored without consequences.
Backing down now would confirm Thaxmore's narrative about human theatrical behavior, and, worse, it would encourage him to continue pushing boundaries with her and, potentially with other students he perceived as weak. She turned around and walked back into the lecture hall, her movement cutting through the clusters of students like a blade through water. The casual confidence in her stride made several species' instinctive threat assessment systems sit up and take notice.
"What did you have in mind?" Maya asked, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence.
Thaxmore's bone ridges expanded slightly, the Zirian equivalent of a satisfied smile. He had clearly expected Maya to either ignore his challenge or respond with empty words. Her direct question caught him momentarily off guard, but he recovered quickly. "The Academy maintains training facilities for physical education," he said, his metallic voice carrying across the silent lecture hall. Perhaps a demonstration of comparative capabilities would settle the question of human competence. It was cleverly phrased. Thaxmore wasn't explicitly calling for a fight that would violate Academy regulations and potentially result in disciplinary action. Instead, he was suggesting what could be framed as an educational exercise, a practical demonstration of the xenobiological concepts they'd just been discussing.
Maya recognized the trap.
If she declined, Thaxmore could claim she was afraid to back up her words. If she accepted, she would be playing into his strengths. Zirions were naturally stronger and more heavily built than humans, with reflexes honed by millions of years of evolution as apex predators.
"What kind of demonstration?" Maya asked.
Dr. Koreshnine's drone cluster had remained in the hall, and now the hive mind consciousness spoke up.
"Perhaps this discussion should move to a more appropriate venue? The training facilities Miss Thaxmore mentioned are designed for exactly this kind of comparative study."
Maya appreciated the professor's intervention, though she suspected the hive mind was more interested in observing the outcome than preventing conflict. Academic creatures to their core, the Koresh Collective rarely passed up opportunities to gather data on species interaction dynamics.
"An excellent suggestion," Thaxmore said, his confidence growing. "A formal demonstration would provide valuable educational opportunities for our fellow students."
Maya found herself at the center of a rapidly forming crowd as students began following the group toward the Academy's physical training complex. Word was spreading through the social networks faster than they could walk, and, by the time they reached the main gymnasium, nearly 100 students had gathered to watch. The training facility was impressive by any standard, multiple environmental zones that could simulate conditions from dozens of different worlds, equipment designed for species ranging from energy beings to crystalline entities, and medical systems capable of handling everything from routine injuries to exotic physiological emergencies. Dr. Koreshnine's drones swarmed toward the control station, their collective consciousness taking charge of the situation with the efficiency that made hive minds such effective administrators. "If we're conducting a demonstration," the professor announced, "it should be properly structured and monitored."
"What parameters are we establishing?"
Thaxmore gestured toward a section of the gymnasium that had been configured to simulate standard Federation environmental conditions.
"Simple physical confrontation. Zirian strength against human creativity."
The dismissive tone in the last word made his opinion clear. Maya noticed several of her classmates wincing at the obvious provocation, while others seemed excited by the prospect of witnessing an actual physical contest between species.
"Non-lethal parameters only," Dr. Koreshnine said firmly. "This is an educational demonstration, not a gladiatorial contest."
"Safety protocols will be strictly enforced." Maya studied the proposed arena, noting the soft padding on the floors and walls, the medical monitoring systems, and the energy barriers that would prevent serious injury.
It was designed for controlled sparring between Academy students, not serious combat. "Standard submission rules?" Maya asked.
"Agreed," Thaxmore said immediately.
"First to yield or be rendered unable to continue." Maya nodded, then began removing her jacket.
Underneath, she wore a simple black shirt that revealed the lean muscle of someone who had never needed to visit a gymnasium. Her arms showed the fine network of scars that marked anyone who had lived closely with danger, some from predator encounters, others from the everyday hazards of a world that didn't forgive carelessness.
Thaxmore, meanwhile, was making a show of stretching his impressive physique.
At 7 feet tall and built like a biological weapons platform, he looked every inch the apex predator his species had evolved to be. His reach advantage alone should have been decisive, never mind the natural armor provided by his bone ridges and the raw power in his oversized frame. "Are you certain about this?" asked Zara, who had appeared at Maya's side with the worried expression of someone who understood exactly how outmatched her roommate appeared to be.
"He's enormous, and Zirions are supposed to be incredibly strong." "They are strong," Maya agreed, sitting down to check her boots. "But strength isn't everything." Around the arena, students were placing informal bets on the outcome.
Maya noticed that the odds were running heavily against her, not surprising, given the obvious physical mismatch. What was interesting was that a few students seemed to be betting on her anyway, mostly those who had heard her descriptions of Deathworld survival during the xenobiology lecture. Dr. Koreshnine's primary drone hovered near the center of the arena.
"Contestants ready? Remember, this is an educational demonstration of species-specific capabilities. Medical monitoring is active, safety protocols are engaged. You may begin when ready."
Thaxmore entered the arena with the confident stride of someone who had never lost a physical confrontation. His species were natural fighters, with instincts and abilities shaped by millions of years of evolutionary pressure. He had reach, weight, strength, and natural armor on his side.
Maya stepped into the arena like she was crossing a street. No dramatic posturing, no attempt to psych out her opponent, no obvious preparation for combat.
To most observers, she looked completely unprepared for what was about to happen.
"Last chance to yield," Thaxmore offered magnanimously.
"I have no desire to injure a fellow student unnecessarily." Maya tilted her head slightly, studying him with the same patient attention she had shown in the corridor the day before.
"I appreciate that," she said. "But I think you're misunderstanding the situation." "How so?"
"You're thinking of this as a contest of strength," Maya explained conversationally.
"But I'm not going to try to overpower you. That would be stupid."
Thaxmore's bone ridges shifted with confusion.
"Then, how do you propose to—"
He never finished the question. Maya moved with the kind of sudden, economical violence that marked professional fighters and natural predators. One moment she was standing 5 feet away, talking in conversational tones. The next moment she was inside his guard, her elbow striking upward into the nerve cluster just below his primary breathing apparatus. The blow was precisely targeted and expertly delivered. Thaxmore's respiratory system seized, cutting off his air supply and sending shock waves through his nervous system. He staggered backward, gasping and disoriented, while Maya flowed around his clumsy counterstrike like water around a stone. "The thing about Deathworlds," Maya said, her voice still conversational as she evaded Thaxmore's wild swing, "is that everything there is stronger than humans.
So we learn to be smart instead of strong. Precise instead of powerful."
Her next attack targeted the major nerve cluster at the base of Thaxmore's neck, just behind his left bone ridge. The strike was delivered with the heel of her palm, driving upward at exactly the angle needed to disrupt neural transmission without causing permanent damage.
Thaxmore's left arm went numb instantly.
He swung desperately with his remaining good arm, trying to use his reach advantage to keep Maya at bay, but she was no longer where his instincts expected her to be. Deathworld predators didn't follow predictable movement patterns, and Maya had learned to fight by studying them. "Zirions are impressive," Maya continued, ducking under another wild swing and striking at the pressure point behind Thaxmore's right knee.
"Strong, fast, naturally armored.
But you evolved on a world where strength was enough. Where being the biggest, toughest thing around meant you won."
Thaxmore's right leg buckled as the nerve strike took effect.
He was now fighting on one working arm and one good leg, his natural advantages negated by precisely targeted attacks that had been drilled into Maya's muscle memory through years of necessity.
"We evolved differently," Maya said, stepping back to give her opponent a moment to process what was happening.
"We learned to find the weak points. The places where even the strongest creatures are vulnerable.
Because on Kepler 442b, if you can't kill something bigger than you, you die. The arena had gone completely silent except for Thaxmore's labored breathing.
Around the perimeter, students watched in fascination and growing alarm as their assumptions about human capabilities crumbled. This wasn't the theatrical posturing Thaxmore had described, it was the methodical application of violence by someone who understood anatomy, leverage, and nerve clusters with scientific precision.
Thaxmore tried to charge, hoping to use his remaining mobility and size advantage to overwhelm Maya through sheer momentum.
It was a reasonable tactic given his limited options, but it played directly into her strengths.
Maya didn't try to stop his charge or deflect it. Instead, she used his forward momentum against him, stepping aside at the last possible moment and delivering a precise strike to the neural pathway that controlled his balance and spatial orientation. Thaxmore crashed into the padded wall, his own force multiplied by Maya's perfectly timed redirection. "Yield," Maya said quietly as Thaxmore struggled to regain his footing. "You're outmatched, and I don't want to hurt you more than necessary." But Thaxmore's pride wouldn't let him quit.
Xerian culture was built around dominance hierarchies, and public submission to a human female would destroy his social standing completely. He pushed himself away from the wall, swaying but still standing, and raised his remaining good arm in a fighting stance.
"Xerions do not yield to inferior species," he snarled, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Maya sighed.
"Your choice." What happened next was almost too fast for most observers to follow.
Maya closed the distance between them in 2 quick steps, her movements flowing like choreographed dance.
She struck 3 different nerve clusters in rapid succession behind his remaining good knee, at the base of his spine, and at the primary ganglia that controlled his voluntary muscle coordination. Thaxmore collapsed instantly, his nervous system overwhelmed by the precisely targeted assault. He wasn't unconscious, but his body was no longer responding to his commands. The medical monitoring systems immediately activated, scanners confirming that he was paralyzed but not seriously injured.
"Temporary neural disruption," Maya announced to Dr. Koreshnine's drones.
"Effects should wear off in 10 to 15 minutes.
No permanent damage."
She knelt beside Thaxmore, checking his breathing and pulse with the casual competence of someone who had field-dressed injuries before. "Sorry," she said quietly, meant for his ears alone. "But you wouldn't stop, and I wasn't going to let you hurt yourself trying to salvage your pride." Dr. Koreshnine's medical drones were already swarming around the fallen Xerian, their scanners confirming Maya's assessment.
"Remarkable precision," the professor's synthesized voice observed. "Miss Chen, your knowledge of Xerian anatomy is quite impressive."
"Basic survival skill," Maya replied, standing and stepping back to give the medical drones room to work.
"You learn the anatomy of anything that might try to kill you."
Xerions are actually easier than most, their nerve clusters are larger and more accessible than human pressure points. Around the arena, the watching students were processing what they had just witnessed. The girl who had seemed so ordinary, so quiet and unremarkable, had just systematically dismantled one of the Federation's most physically imposing species using nothing but precise knowledge and perfectly executed technique.
"How did you learn to fight like that?" asked one of the students who had bet on Maya, his voice filled with awe. "Same way you learn anything on a Deathworld," Maya replied, checking her hands for damage.
"You get taught by people who know, you practice until it's automatic, and you hope you never have to use it." "But where did you practice? Who taught you combat techniques against different species?" Maya looked at the student with mild surprise, as if the answer should be obvious. "Kepler 442b has native predators from a dozen different evolutionary backgrounds. Crystal formations that hunt like pack animals, energy parasites that disrupt nervous systems, pseudo-intelligent fungi that mimic other life forms. If you can disable a phase hunter, taking down a Xerian is just a matter of adjusting the targeting parameters." The casual way she discussed fighting creatures that most Federation citizens knew only from documentary programs made several students step backward involuntarily.
Maya noticed their reaction and felt a familiar pang of isolation.
Once again, her background had created distance between her and potential friends.
"Maya."
Thaxmore's voice was weak but clear. The medical drones had stabilized him, and sensation was beginning to return to his extremities.
I owe you an apology.
Maya knelt beside him again, her expression softening slightly.
You don't owe me anything. You made assumptions based on incomplete information. It happens.
I was arrogant, Thaxmore continued, his voice gaining strength as the neural disruption faded.
I assumed human weakness without considering human adaptation. It was foolish.
It was understandable, Maya corrected gently. Most humans you've met probably were exactly what you expected. Garden world humans don't usually have reason to learn combat techniques.
I'm an outlier.
Dr. Koreshnine's primary drone hovered nearby, recording everything for what would undoubtedly become a case study in xenopsychology and species interaction dynamics.
Miss Chen, the professor said, would you be willing to discuss your techniques with interested students?
Your methods could be valuable for those studying comparative anatomy and non-lethal restraint procedures.
Maya hesitated.
She had come to the academy to learn, not to teach, and certainly not to become known as the girl who specialized in violence.
But she recognized the genuine academic interest in the professor's request, and several students were nodding eagerly.
I suppose, she said finally.
But I want to be clear about something.
These techniques exist because I grew up in an environment where knowing them meant survival.
They're not tricks or games, they're tools for staying alive.
Anyone who learns them needs to understand the responsibility that comes with that knowledge. Of course, Dr. Koreshnine agreed.
Perhaps we could arrange a formal seminar? Practical applications of xenoanatomy in conflict resolution.
It would fit nicely into both the biology and cultural studies curricula. Maya nodded, though part of her wondered what her parents would think about their daughter becoming a lecturer on the finer points of disabling sentient beings. They had sent her to the academy to build bridges between her world and the wider Federation, not to demonstrate the martial applications of frontier education. But, as she looked around the arena at faces filled with newfound respect rather than fear or suspicion, Maya realized that perhaps this was exactly the kind of bridge building her world needed. Not diplomatic platitudes about cultural understanding, but practical demonstrations of what Deathworld humans brought to the galactic community. Strength, precision, and the hard-won knowledge that survival sometimes required the willingness to do what civilized people preferred to avoid thinking about. As the crowd began to disperse and medical drones helped Thaxmore to his feet, Maya found herself approached by a small group of students who had been watching from the sidelines. Their body language was respectful but not fearful, the kind of interest shown by people who recognized competence and wanted to learn from it.
Maya, said a reptilian student whose species Maya didn't immediately recognize, would you be willing to teach us some basic self-defense techniques? Nothing aggressive, just practical knowledge for those of us who might find ourselves in dangerous situations? Maya looked at the earnest faces surrounding her and felt something shift in her understanding of her place at the academy. She had expected to be an outsider, tolerated but never truly understood. Instead, she was discovering that her unique background filled a gap that many students hadn't even realized existed.
All right, she said after a moment.
But we do this properly. No showing off, no trying to impress anyone.
If you want to learn these techniques, you learn them with the same respect you'd show any other potentially dangerous knowledge.
The agreement was unanimous and immediate.
Maya realized that she had just agreed to become something she had never expected to be, a teacher, helping bridge the gap between Deathworld necessity and Garden World curiosity. It wasn't the path to integration she had planned, but it might be exactly what both sides needed. 3 weeks after the incident in the gymnasium, Maya's life at the academy had settled into a routine that would have seemed impossible during her first day. The girl who had once sat alone in the back of lecture halls now found herself at the center of an informal study group that met twice weekly in the xenobiology lab. The practical xenoanatomy seminar had become one of the academy's most popular elective courses, though Dr. Koreshnine insisted on calling it by its official title, Applied Interspecies Conflict Resolution through Anatomical Understanding. Students from across the curriculum had enrolled, drawn by curiosity about Deathworld survival techniques and the rare opportunity to learn from someone with real-world experience. Maya stood at the center of the lab, a holographic Xerian anatomy display rotating slowly beside her as she explained the neurological pathways that controlled voluntary muscle function.
Her teaching style was direct and practical, focusing on observable facts rather than theoretical frameworks.
The key is precision over force, she was saying to a mixed group of 23 students representing 12 different species. Most beings assume that disabling an opponent requires overwhelming strength. But, if you understand the anatomy, you can achieve the same result with minimal energy expenditure. A crystalline student raised one of their fractally structured appendages.
But, surely such techniques are only effective against carbon-based life forms? Our neural networks function through quantum resonance rather than electrochemical impulses. Maya smiled.
The crystalline, whose name was something like a musical chord that translated roughly to harmony of 7 frequencies, had become one of her most dedicated students despite initially being skeptical about the applicability of Deathworld techniques to silicon-based physiology.
Good question, Maya said. Dr. Koresh-9, could we display the quantum resonance map for crystalline nervous systems?
The hive-mind consciousness, which had taken to observing every seminar session with obvious fascination, immediately complied. The holographic display shifted to show the complex geometric patterns that governed crystalline cognition and voluntary control. Now, Maya continued, highlighting specific intersection points where multiple resonance patterns converged. Your neural networks may operate on different principles, but they still require coordination points where information is processed and distributed. Disrupt the coordination, and you disrupt the system. She gestured to several nodes in the display. These quantum confluence points serve the same function as nerve clusters in carbon-based species. The targeting methods are different, harmonic disruption rather than pressure point strikes, but the principle is identical. Harmony of 7 frequencies examined the display with new interest.
I had not considered that perspective. The mathematical elegance is actually quite beautiful. Deathworld survival is about pattern recognition, Maya explained.
Once you understand that all living systems require coordination and control mechanisms, you can learn to identify and exploit those mechanisms regardless of their specific implementation. Another student, a methane-breathing gaseous entity whose form shimmered with contained electromagnetic fields, pulsed with what Maya had learned to recognize as excitement. This approach could revolutionize our understanding of nonviolent conflict resolution.
Instead of relying on weapons or overwhelming force, we could use knowledge of natural systems to achieve tactical objectives with minimal harm.
Dr. Koresh-9's drone cluster clicked appreciatively.
An excellent observation. Miss Chen, your techniques represent a fascinating intersection of biological science, practical application, and ethical consideration. Maya felt a warmth of satisfaction that had nothing to do with temperature. When she had first demonstrated her abilities against Thaxmore, she had worried that others would see her as violent or dangerous. Instead, her students had embraced the scientific and philosophical implications of her knowledge. Speaking of ethical considerations, said Marcus Webb, a human student from Earth whose major was Federation law, how do we balance the practical benefits of this knowledge against the potential for misuse? It was a question that came up in every session, and Maya appreciated that her students took it seriously. The techniques she taught were genuinely dangerous. Knowledge of how to disable sentient beings was inherently powerful and potentially harmful. Same way we handle any dangerous knowledge, Maya replied. With respect, responsibility, and clear ethical guidelines. A surgeon knows how to cut people open, but that knowledge is guided by the principle of healing rather than harming. She gestured to the assembled students. Everyone here has signed the Academy's ethical conduct agreements. You understand that this knowledge is for emergency self-defense and academic study only. More importantly, you understand that true strength comes from not having to use these techniques. But what about situations where peaceful resolution isn't possible? Asked a Deltan student whose mathematical mindset made her particularly good at analyzing the geometric aspects of Maya's techniques. Surely there are conflicts that can't be resolved through discussion or compromise? Maya nodded thoughtfully. There are. But those situations are rarer than most people think. Usually, when someone says violence is the only option, what they really mean is that violence is the quickest or easiest option they can see.
She paused, considering her words carefully. The goal isn't to eliminate conflict, that's impossible when you have beings with genuinely different needs and values.
The goal is to make sure that when conflict does occur, it's resolved with minimal harm and maximum understanding.
Is that what happened with Thaxmore? Asked Zara, who had become one of Maya's most dedicated students despite her initial nervousness about the whole concept of combat training. Maya glanced toward the back of the lab, where Thaxmore himself sat observing the session. The Zirian had become a regular attendee after his recovery, initially drawn by curiosity about the techniques that had defeated him so thoroughly. To everyone's surprise, including his own, he had proven to be one of Maya's most insightful students. Thaxmore was operating from a cultural framework where physical dominance determined social hierarchy, Maya said diplomatically. Once he understood that I wasn't challenging his status but simply defending my boundaries, the conflict resolved itself. Thaxmore's bone ridges shifted in what Maya had learned was the Zirian equivalent of wry amusement.
Miss Chen is being gracious, he said, his metallic voice carrying clearly through the lab. The truth is that I was behaving like a spoiled juvenile, using my physical advantages to intimidate others because I had never learned more sophisticated social skills.
The admission created a ripple of surprise through the class. Zirians were not known for public displays of humility or self-criticism. What changed your perspective? Asked Dr. Koresh-9, their collective attention focusing on the large alien with obvious scientific interest.
Thaxmore considered the question for a long moment.
Pain, he said finally, which drew nervous laughter from several students.
But not the physical pain of being defeated.
The social pain of realizing that my behavior was genuinely harmful to others, and that my supposed superiority was based on ignorance rather than genuine strength. He gestured toward Maya with something approaching reverence.
Miss Chen could have humiliated me completely.
Instead, she used exactly as much force as necessary to end the conflict, then treated me with respect and dignity afterward.
That taught me more about real strength than 18 years of Zirian cultural conditioning.
Maya felt slightly embarrassed by the praise, but she recognized the importance of Thaxmore's public acknowledgement. His presence in her classes had done more to legitimize her teaching than any amount of faculty approval could have achieved. The point, Maya said, steering the discussion back to academic ground, is that understanding anatomy and physiology gives you options.
Knowledge is power, but it's also responsibility. The more you understand about how to harm someone, the more obligated you become to find ways not to. That's a fascinating ethical framework, said Dr. Velkar, who had begun attending the seminars as an observer.
The mentory professor's feathers were cycling through rapid color changes that indicated deep thought. In diplomatic contexts, we often encounter similar paradoxes. The more capable you are of inflicting damage, the more credible your threats become, which paradoxically makes actual violence less necessary.
Maya nodded. Exactly.
Predators don't usually fight each other unless they have no choice, because they understand the potential for mutual destruction. It's prey animals that tend to fight to the death, because they don't have other options. The observation sparked a lively discussion about predator psychology, evolutionary game theory, and the role of capability versus intention in conflict resolution. Maya found herself moderating a debate between students whose perspectives spanned dozens of different evolutionary backgrounds and cultural frameworks. As the session wound down, students began filing out in small groups, their conversations continuing into the corridors. Maya remained behind to clean up the holographic displays and answer individual questions, a routine that had become as natural as breathing. Maya, Thaxmore approached as the last of the other students departed.
I wanted to thank you again.
Not just for the lessons, but for giving me the chance to become someone better than I was.
Maya looked up at the massive alien, noting the genuine sincerity in his expression.
You did the hard work yourself.
I just provided some perspective.
Perhaps. But, without that perspective.
Thaxmore trailed off, then started again.
I have been thinking about what you said, about predators and prey. I believe I understand now why your people survived on Kepler 442b while other species might not have.
Oh?
You learned to be predators without becoming monsters.
To be capable of violence without being defined by it.
That
That is a very rare thing in the galaxy.
Maya felt a strange mix of pride and sadness at his words.
Maybe that's what the Federation needs more of. People who can protect what matters without losing sight of why it matters.
Thaxmore's bone ridges shifted thoughtfully.
Is that why you came here? To teach the Federation about Deathworld wisdom? Maya laughed softly. I came here to learn about the wider galaxy.
The teaching part was accidental. She paused, considering.
But maybe accidents sometimes point us toward where we're supposed to be.
As if summoned by her words, Dr. Koreshnine's primary drone approached with the purposeful movement that indicated official business.
Miss Chen, I have a communication for you from the Academy administration.
It seems your seminars have attracted attention beyond our campus.
Maya felt a flutter of nervousness. What kind of attention? The good kind, apparently.
The Federation Diplomatic Corps has requested a consultation on conflict resolution techniques. Specifically, they're interested in your approach to non-lethal dispute resolution between species with significant physical mismatches.
The implications hit Maya immediately.
The Diplomatic Corps didn't make casual requests if they wanted her expertise, it meant they were facing real-world situations where traditional negotiation had failed.
They want me to teach diplomats how to fight? Maya asked, somewhat incredulously.
They want you to teach diplomats how to avoid fighting while maintaining credible defensive capabilities, Dr. Koreshnine corrected. There's a significant difference, and, apparently your seminars have demonstrated that difference more effectively than decades of traditional conflict resolution training.
Maya looked around the now empty lab, thinking about the journey that had brought her from Kepler 442b's crystal forests to the Academy's sterile corridors to this unexpected opportunity to influence galactic politics.
When do they want to meet? She asked.
Next week.
The consultation would take place on Station Central, with representatives from multiple species and political entities.
It would be significant. Maya nodded slowly.
Part of her was terrified by the prospect of advising experienced diplomats who dealt with interstellar conflicts as a matter of routine. But another part recognized this as exactly the kind of bridge-building opportunity she had hoped to find when she left home.
I'll do it, she said finally. But I want to bring some of my students. This isn't knowledge that should be hoarded by one person.
Dr. Koreshnine's drones clicked with what Maya had learned to interpret as pleased surprise.
An excellent suggestion.
A diverse perspective team would be far more valuable than a single consultant, regardless of expertise level.
Then, we have a team, Maya said, looking at Thaxmore, assuming you're willing to take a trip to Station Central? The Zirian's bone ridges expanded in what Maya now recognized as genuine joy.
It would be an honor to serve alongside you, instructor.
Maya smiled at the title.
6 months ago, she had been just another frontier girl trying to figure out how to fit into the wider galaxy. Now she was apparently an instructor, a consultant, and a bridge between worlds that had never learned to understand each other. It wasn't the path she had planned, but it felt right in a way that academic study alone never had. She was using her unique background not as a barrier to overcome but as a strength to share. As she gathered her materials and prepared to leave the lab, Maya caught her reflection in one of the display screens. The girl looking back at her still carried the quiet confidence that marked Deathworld survivors, but there was something new there as well, a sense of purpose that went beyond simple survival. She had found her place in the galaxy, not by hiding her differences but by helping others understand their value. The Deathworld girl who had once sat calm in hostile environments was now teaching others to find that same calm in the face of conflict. And if an alien bully occasionally got his misconceptions corrected in the process, well, that was just education working as intended. Outside the lab windows, the Academy's manicured grounds stretched toward a horizon that no longer seemed foreign or impossibly safe. Maya had brought a piece of Kepler 442b's honest danger with her, and, in return, the Academy had given her the tools to make that danger into something constructive. It was, she reflected, exactly the kind of mutual exchange that made civilization possible.